All right, welcome everybody to a very special session. So, I'm not sure if you saw what I just posted on social media not that long ago, within the half hour. So, we're going to be doing something a little bit different in this session over the next few days. Usually, we do the daily power parsha, which is a look at the Torah portion, but this week, because of the holiday of Passover, so I wanted to do something a little bit different. So what I'd like to do is something called Tales to Inspire. Okay? Tales to Inspire. So take a look. I'm sharing with you my screen. Tell me if you see that. Tales to Inspire. 10-minute power sessions, compelling Passover stories, timely messages. It's not going to be exactly 10 minutes because I may tell a few stories, but the goal here is to share inspiration in the form of stories related to Passover that have very interesting lessons that I think we can all relate to, including in the current situation that we find ourselves in. Okay, I'm going to stop the share because you get a sense of the image. Now, there's another reason why I wanted to do this a storytelling session over the next few days, and that's because the Torah portion of this Saturday is the same one that we studied last week. Because due to the holiday, we wouldn't read the Torah reading of Shemini in the synagogues. We read a reading especially dedicated to Passover. So to not read, these stories are all true stories, all Passover related, and all that I think have timeless lessons, including lessons that relate specifically to the situation that we find ourselves in right now. So the first story takes place in 1945. The story takes place in 1945. It's March 1945. And the main character of our story is a rabbi whose name is Rabbi Eliezer Zusha, Portugal, but he's known as the Skalerner Rebbe. The Skalerner Rebbe. And he came from a small town called Skuleni, which was in northeastern Romania. Now it is part of Ukraine. And if Russia has its way, it'll be now part of Russia. No, I'm kidding. We'll stand back from the the Russian conversation. But this rabbi was a rabbi from Romania, and he was a rebbe. He had a following, but this was 1945, and it was at the tail end of World War II, the tail end of the Holocaust. And although Germany wouldn't officially be defeated and out of the war until May of 1945, Germany wouldn't surrender for another month and a half or so. Nonetheless, at that point, already in March 1945, Russia had liberated parts of Eastern Europe, including the area where the Skalerner Rebbe was, which was in Chernovitz, Bukovina. That's where he was. And in that space, the Skalerner Rebbe found himself shortly before the holiday of Passover. And he wanted nothing more before Passover than to have the opportunity to bake shmura matzah, which is the hand-baked matzah made from the specially washed flour that was ground from wheat, that was washed from the time of harvest to make sure that no water had come in contact with it, which is the best way to do the mitzvah of eating matzah on Passover. It's like the highest standard of matzah. And this Rebbe, the Skalerner Rebbe, wanted nothing more than to have the opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah. Well, lo and behold, shortly before Passover, a few weeks before Passover, somehow, miraculously, he got a shipment of this special flour sent to him in order for him to bake matzahs. Now, it wasn't a lot of flour. It was a very, very meager amount of flour. And so he began to get to work. He mixed the flour with water, and he began the process of baking the matzah. And he baked, what they would call it today, like a limited run, small batch matzah, craft, handmade, it's like all that stuff is in. Organic matzah. And he had a very limited run for Passover. So he decided that what he was going to do is he was going to send matzahs, 3 matzot, because we traditionally use 3 for the Seder, 3 matzahs to various Hasidic Rebbes in the area that had survived the war. Say there was a group, he knew of a handful of Hasidic Rebbes that had survived, and so he began putting out the word saying that he was going to send, or that he was preparing matzah, and he was pretty much the only one that had this flour to be able to prepare the matzah. So he sent out the word that he would be preparing the matzah, and that whoever wants of these Hasidic leaders, they should come to him and pick up the matzah before Passover. And so it happened. So he had, for a few days, he had people coming and picking up the matzah. Well, one day, there was a rabbi who came to him. The rabbi's name was Rabbi Moshe Hager. And he was the son of the Richness Rebbe, another Hasidic Rebbe. Some of you may be familiar with the Vishnitz Hasidic group. Vishnitz, the Richness Rebbe. This is the Richness Rebbe, was his father. His name was Rabbi Baruch Hager. And this was the son, Rabbi Moshe Hager. So the son of this Rebbe, of this Hasidic Rebbe, came to the Skalerna Rebbe to pick up matzahs for his father. And so the Skalerna Rebbe hands this son hands him 3 matzahs, and he says, my father asked if you could give him 6. 6. Now everyone's getting 3. You know how that happens when you're giving, kids snacks, and the kid says, oh, I'm getting 1 for my brother, my sister, my nephew, my mother, my father, my Zayd, and my Bubby, right? You know all that? Yeah. So he says, my father said that I shouldn't just pick up 3, I should pick up 6. So on the one hand, he was thinking 3 is 3. I mean, that's how much everyone's getting. You're not getting 6, you're getting 3. On the other hand, his father, the Richness Rebbe, Rabbi Baruch Hager, was quite the Hasidic master, was quite a Jewish leader, and so he felt that if he asked for it, he was going to give it to him. So he gives the son of this Rebbe, he gives him 6 matzahs. This is like a week or 2 before Pesach. Okay, a day before Pesach, Erev Pesach. In other words, like the afternoon or the morning, that the Seder is that night. This son, Rabbi Moshe Hager, comes back to the Skalerna Rebbe, holding 3 matzahs. And he says, my father told me to give these 3 matzahs to you. So he says, I don't understand. A week ago, you told me that he wanted 6. And now you're telling me that he's sending back 3. What's going on? He says, my father asked me to ask you, did you save any matzahs for yourself? And the Skalerna Rebbe said, he answered, no, I gave them all away. And so the son of the Richness Rebbe said, he handed him the matzahs and said, my father said, these matzahs are for you. That's the story. And it's such a beautiful story on so many levels. And by the way, if you want to jump in on what you took from the story, or what you're taking from the story, you can unmute yourself at any time and jump right in. But here's some thoughts that I had. Number 1, the dedication to making matzah, to making the best matzah before Pesach. It's a beautiful thing. Number 2, the Skalerna Rebbe could have easily kept all the matzahs for himself and his family, right? Could have easily said, I got the flour, right? I got the flour power, and that's it. I'm gonna bake all the matzahs and keep them for myself. But no, he sends out a message to all the other rabbis, all the other leaders in the area, and he says, come and get. That's the second lesson that I'm taking from it. Third lesson, yeah, how he gives away all of the matzahs. It's not just he was willing to give away a lot of them. He gave away, as the story unfolds, at the end of the story we see that he gave away every single matzah that he baked. He didn't save not one matzah for himself. That's the dedication that a leader has. A leader has a dedication even to the point of sacrificing self for the sake of others. And yet at the same time, there's a lesson, a beautiful lesson, lesson number 4, from the Seret Vishnitzer Rebbe, who knows his customer, or his supplier in this case. He knows the Skolerner Rebbe. He knows he's going to give away every matzah. And so he asks his son to get 6 so that he can return the 3 Erev Pesach and make sure that he also has the matzahs for the Seder. You know what they say? Or you know what it says in Pirkei Avot? It says in Ethics of Our Fathers, Ezehu Chacham Haroeh et Hanoled. Who is wise? One who sees what will be. So sometimes it takes some seichel, takes some insight to recognize how things are going to play out. And so here was this Rebbe who loved, who cared about the other. So they both cared about each other. One was willing to give him 6, and the other one was willing to take what was demanding 6, so that he can give him back the 3 that he would ultimately need before Passover. Does it make sense? Story makes sense? The lessons make sense? Yes? We find ourselves now in quarantine. And it's easy to think about only ourselves, right? Like what we need. Because we're in a moment of, on some level, these are desperate moments. I don't want to overstate it. Not desperate, but these are trying moments, difficult moments. And so we will be forgiven for thinking pretty much exclusively about ourselves and what we need, right? How we're going to get the food that we need, how we're going to get the supplies that we need, how we're going to get the masks and the gloves and the food and all the stuff that we need. But here you have a story of somebody who in 1945, the war's not over yet. They were liberated, but the war wasn't officially over yet. Who's baking matzah through some miraculously procured flour, and who cares about the others. And the others care about him. It's a beautiful example of what it means to live with the motto of chesed, even under desperate times. Desperate times should not force us or drive us to resort to desperate measures. Even in difficult times, we should maintain our values. And our values are caring about the other, even sometimes putting the other before ourselves. Okay, so that, I mentioned this before, and I posted on Facebook as well. Because this Shabbat's Torah portion is Shmini, because we didn't read it last Shabbat. Well, we didn't read it because we weren't in Shul, but even if we were, we wouldn't read it because we were reading a Passover reading. So therefore, it would kind of be the same readings. We get more insights, and also I wanted to share some stories about Pesach and their messages. Okay, so on to story number 2. Story number 2 is a story with the Baal Shem Tov. Now, as some of you may know, the Baal Shem Tov lived in Eastern Europe, Russia, Eastern Europe, that part of the world. And for many, many years, he wanted nothing more than to move and to settle to Israel. He wanted to move to Israel. And many times he actually started the journey to Israel, but he never got there. He never, one thing after another, one calamity, mishap, whatever. Divine providence, orchestration was such that many stories are told about his attempts to journey to Israel and not getting there. I'm talking about like ships turning around and shipwrecks and just travel plans being thwarted, all sorts of things. So on one of these such journeys, the Baal Shem Tov was traveling with his daughter Edel. It seems that his wife had already passed away, so it was just him and his daughter, and they were traveling, attempting to travel to Israel, and they were traveling by ship, but there was a mishap with the ship, and the ship ended up at the port known as Constantinople, in Turkey, known today as Istanbul, right? Constantinople, Istanbul, Turkey. And the ship arrives there right before Passover, right before Pesach. Now, this was not the intention. They were not traveling to Turkey, intending to travel, but this is where they were. Again, they never made it to Israel. They eventually turned back. But this was the story of Pesach in Turkey. And so they find themselves in Turkey a day or two before the holiday without any provisions. The story that I've heard classically over the years is that there was some sort of, again, I mentioned it before, some sort of issue with the boat, a shipwreck. They had to throw belongings overboard to lighten the load, whatever it was. The Baal Shem Tov and his daughter find themselves pretty much without anything, no provisions, right before Pesach. So what do? Nothing. They looked for a place to hang out and a place to stay. They found a place to stay, but they had nothing for the Seder. And so the Baal Shem Tov, it's the eve of it's the Erev Pesach, the eve of Passover. So the Baal Shem Tov goes to the synagogue, and in the synagogue he meets somebody. This fellow was also from Poland, was also from Eastern Europe, and he knew the legend. He knew a little bit about the Baal Shem Tov, and he said, "You know what? I'm here now also, and my wife and I, we have provisions for the Seder. So we would be honored if you and your daughter would come to us for the Seder." Oh, the Baal Shem Tov was very happy, and he accepted the invitation. He went home, or wherever they were staying. He went to tell his daughter, and that night they celebrated the Seder with this newfound friend from Poland. And the Seder was marvelous. There was enough food. Physically, it was marvelous. Spiritually, it was marvelous. Insights, inspiration, stories. Baal Shem Tov stories. No, maybe not. It was Baal Shem Tov himself. But stories and the story of the Exodus and all wonderful things with all of the foods and delicacies associated with the Seder. Okay. It's time to wrap up the Seder. And the Baal Shem Tov turns to his host and he says, "Look, you gave my daughter and I the most wonderful gift, the opportunity to have a Seder, even in these difficult times. What can I bless you with?" Now, this man knew the legend and knew the powers of the Baal Shem Tov and the power of his blessings. So he said, "Look, my wife and I, we have, thank God, we have what we need. Except for one thing. We don't have the blessing of a child. And so I want to ask if you might bless us to have a child." Immediately the Baal Shem Tov smiles and he says, "By next year, you and your wife should be blessed with a son, with a baby boy." And the man and his wife say a big hearty Amen. That was the blessing. Immediately, the heavens thunder and a voice calls out from heaven that only the Baal Shem Tov could hear. And the voice called out from heaven saying, "Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov has just lost his share in the world to come, in spiritual paradise in the afterlife." Why? Because this person and his wife, this couple, were destined physically and spiritually. In other words, they physically, and because of a spiritual decree, they were not destined to have children. And what happens? But what happens when a tzaddik like the Baal Shem Tov gives a blessing? So it says tzaddik goizer v'akadosh baruch hu mekayim. A tzaddik decrees and God follows that. God says, "Listen, if a tzaddik, my rep on earth, if he says something, then I'm gonna deliver that. But I may not be happy about it." So that the heavens thundered and a voice cried out saying, "Here's the deal. The blessing will be honored, but because the Baal Shem Tov went against the divine plan, so to speak, that's it. No share in the world to come. No olam haba. No paradise in the afterlife." The Baal Shem Tov hears this, and he breaks out into an even bigger smile, and he says, Baruch Hashem, thank God. Now I can begin serving God purely without any ulterior motives, totally altruistically, without any desire or belief or thought about any reward. It's just going to be doing what's right, serving Hashem purely for the sake of serving Hashem. Upon which another heavenly voice broke out from the heavens saying, "It's thus been decreed that Yisrael Baal Shem Tov has regained his share in the world to come," thus thwarting his plans once again. But here's the point. So that's the end of the story. There are different versions of the story. Some have the one that I just shared, where the voice from heaven rings out a second time, saying that he regained his share because of he expressed his wishes to serve God for no reward. So that earned him once again a share in the world to come. Other versions omit that ending. I wasn't there. I can't tell you exactly what happened, but I will tell you there's a powerful lesson from this whole story, and that is number one, hospitality. Right? This man invites the Baal Shem Tov in. Now, we're under quarantine. We're not meant to invite people in, but there are other ways to invite people in and to share our blessings with others. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is gratitude. The Baal Shem Tov blesses his host and the hostess, so we should show gratitude for those that help us. That's lesson number two. Lesson number three is the Baal Shem Tov's wish or expression of joy in serving God without any sake of reward. So many times it's hard to know what our motives are. Are we doing the right thing because the right thing, or because we think that when we do it there's going to be some sort of benefit on whatever level? Whether it's going to make me feel good, whether it's going to make others feel good, which will then make me feel good, whether it's going to make God feel good, which will then make me feel good, whatever. But it's hard to know how purely our actions are. In other words, how free of self-orientation our good deeds are. And here we have a beautiful example of the Baal Shem Tov celebrating, at least momentarily, according to this version of the story that I told, celebrating the opportunity to truly do something good for the sake of doing something good. Make sense? Those are my takeaways. Final story. I know we're going over time, but hey, it's Passover, so we're doing it. Last story. Last story takes place yesterday. Well, not literally. Sorry? Oh. So the last story takes place yesterday. Not literally yesterday, but yesterday a little while back. 118 years ago. Yesterday was the bris of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe was born on the 11th day of Nisan, a few days before Passover, and his bris was on the 18th day of Nisan. Today's the 19th, so it was basically the 4th day of the holiday. It was Passover. The bris took place, again, this was 1902, so it's 118 years ago. This is the city of Nikolaev, which is a city in Ukraine. And the Rebbe's bris, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's bris, took place in his grandfather's home. Again, let me set it. Let me give you the setting. It's 1902, 4th day of Passover, 18th day of Nisan, 4th day of Passover. The bris is taking place in the Rebbe's grandfather's home. Yeah. And there were a handful of guests that came. A number of guests came.
Where?
The Rebbe's father was sorry?
Where?
This was Nikolaev. Nikolaev, Ukraine. So there were guests over, and there was one guest who was the shochet, the ritual slaughterer of the town. That didn't sound right. He was the butcher. That also didn't sound right. He prepared the kosher meat in town. So he was a very, very, he was very strict with himself on Passover. And you should know it's not super unusual. Many have this custom, especially in the Hasidic communities, that they don't eat out on Passover. When I say eat out, they don't eat in anyone else's homes. No matter how religious, observant, kosher, it doesn't matter. Many have the custom to only eat the food that they themselves or their wives are preparing. It's not a casting doubt on anyone else. It's just an extra stringency that many observe on Passover. It's kind of like not using processed foods. We make everything ourselves, and we eat at home. We eat stuff that we've been handling ourselves. So this rabbi, and I'll tell you his name was Rabbi Usher Grossman. So he didn't eat at the bris. He came to the Rebbe's bris in 1902. And by the way, the Rebbe's grandfather was the Rav of the town. He was the rabbi of the town. This guy was the Rabbi Grossman was the shochet, was the slaughterer, and Meir Shlomo Yanofsky. The Rebbe's grandfather's name was Meir Shlomo Yanofsky. He was the Rav, the rabbi of the town. And this other rabbi, the Sheikh, was Usher Grossman. So he didn't eat. So the Rav says to him, what, you don't trust me? I'm the Rav, I'm the rabbi of the town. You don't trust my cooking? He's like, no, it's not about you, it's about me. That's right, that's a famous line. It's not you, it's me. No, I've trusted it's kosher, 100%. I know it's kosher, but it's a custom, tradition. We don't eat out. Fine. So he smiled, the Rebbe's grandfather, and he said, you know what? I'll let you off the hook. I won't pressure you to eat because you saved my life. What was the story? Years earlier, there was a breakout of typhus that happened in the city. And when people got afflicted, came down with typhus, so the way it was handled is that people were quarantined. Those afflicted with typhus were quarantined, and the way it worked then is they were quarantined outside of the city. There were special camps set up outside the city, and people were sent in isolation and quarantine outside the city. And typically people were sent there pretty much to die. There were sick beds and whatever, but it was a terrible situation. Emotionally, psychologically, and physically, it was in terrible conditions. And so the Rebbe's grandfather, Meir Shlomo Yanofsky, got typhus. And the way he told the story is he was sent out in the quarantine, and he felt like he wasn't going to make it. He felt like he was dying. Again, dying physically, but also dying inside with this, just being in such a place of sickness and ill health and everything, with no hope. Until his friend, the Sheikhet, again, this is a story that happened years before this bris. Okay? Until the Sheikhet, Rabbi Usher Grossman, came by. So Usher visited him every single day. Every single day he went out into the quarantine, and he went up to the point where it was safe, up to the point, the boundary line, so to speak. He went close enough to Rabbi Yanofsky to where he could hear him, and every single day he would recite a section from the book of Tanya, which is a book of Chabad Hasidic philosophy. He would read a section of Tanya that talks about God's providence and how God's creating the world anew every single moment, and how that should allow a person to never despair, because even at this moment God is recreating the world with love and with hope and with possibilities. And every single day he read out loud on the top of his lungs that section from Tanya to give his good friend Rabbi Yanofsky, the Rebbe's grandfather, to pick up his spirits. And when he recovered, and he did, as you know, because we talked about part of the story that happened later, years later. So when the Rebbe's grandfather recovered, he said that I owe it to my good friend, Rabbi Usher Grossman, who every day read this section of Tanya in the quarantine or next to the quarantine, so that I could hear it and be inspired. And so, fast forward to the bris. He says, if you don't want to eat my food, I'm not offended. After all, you did save my life, so I'll let it slide. I'll give you a pass this time. And that's the end of the story. So I think, again, I wanted to tell this story because obviously it's got the quarantine connection. So that's one thing. But also we see here again the notion of good friends, and then the idea of being there for each other, even in desperate times. When a person is in isolation, it can be very, very difficult, not only physically, but spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, on every single level, right? At every single level, it's difficult, and it can be difficult. And here you have a story of somebody who went to his friend every single day to check on him and to give him. It was to the point where Rabbi Yanofsky was so ill that the Usher Grossman wasn't even sure if his friend could hear him. But he said it out loud. He read it loudly every single day. I think there's another message here. Not only to be there for the other person who might be in quarantine, we're all in quarantine, who might be, in a difficult place on whatever level, but also it's not enough to do it once. He did it every single day. He didn't just go once. Oh, I went once. No. We call it in Yiddish to be yotze sein. It means like to discharge your obligation. Yeah, I checked on him. He's hopefully he'll have a recovery. No, he went every single day. And again, it's a reminder for us to be there for the other in a consistent way. We all know those that could use some additional checking in on and help in whatever way. Let's be there for them. So these are 3 stories. Number 1, we had the story of the Skalerner Rebbe who baked the matzah, gave everything away, and his good friend returned them back to him. We have the story of the Baal Shem Tov who blessed his host with a child. And, oh, by the way, she did give birth to a child. But Last was told that he would lose his world to share in the world to come, and was grateful for that, for the opportunity to truly serve God and do the right thing in an altruistic fashion. And then we have the story of the bris, the Rebbe's bris, where the sheichet wouldn't eat from the rabbi's meal. The rabbi was not upset at all. On the contrary, he was grateful, ever grateful to his friend for being there for him in his moment of quarantine. All right, hope you enjoyed the stories. Hope you enjoyed the first session, the first edition of our Tales to Inspire. Tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. We have another few stories that we'll do then as well. And then, once again, Wednesday and Thursday are the holidays. And then Friday, we'll pick it back up, probably with Power Parsha on Friday. All right?
Question, please?
Yes, Donna.
So in the first story, what if, how is one supposed to feel as one has the matzahs